There's nothing quite like a great, big, heaping, healthy portion of WWE revisionist history for life. I'm John Renton with my review WWE on A&E Biography, WWE Legends on the NWO. One of the most influential stables in wrestling history, especially modern history. And goodness me, well, it was great to see some of the footage, and there were some emotional parts. Boy, the revisionist history, it was off that goddamn charts. It was almost busting the goddamn revisionist history meter that apparently is a thing now. I know these are fluff pieces. I know that history is rewritten and rewritten and rewritten by the victors, but goodness me. Anyway, so I love the NWO when, I was a fan during the Monday Night Wars and, living through the Monday Night Wars. It was a hell of a goddamn time. It was great to see who was going to join the NWO. Hogan, Hall, Nash, who were they going to be able to get to join their ranks? And then it got to the point where it was so goddamn big, there were like 3 limos and 40 guys that were part of the NWO, and it got too big and unwieldy, and they screwed up the whole thing with Sting and all that. And yes, I'm going to talk about that briefly, but if this is how they're going to start their, WWE biography season, we're in for a long, long slog, because there were some good parts of this, but also a lot of it has been told. It's all been told before. So anyway, Eric Bischoff says, I'll talk about it because I fucking invented it. Yeah, you took the idea from New Japan, which he's talked about before, and that fans gravitated to them because they saw a little bit of themselves in the NWO, being the villain, everything, cheering for the villain. In Cody, Wyoming, Eric Bischoff lives there, and it looks like a nice area. It also looks like an area where there isn't a lot going on. I don't really think I'd want to live there because the winters must be goddamn brutal. That wrestling is great storytelling, and you can get wrapped up in it, and it will feel real to you. If you're a fan of it, it will feel real to you, and that's actually the case. That's why I've loved wrestling since War to Sell the Score, and I will always love wrestling. Even if I hate some of the shows, I will always love the concept of wrestling. He was hired as a C-Squad announcer in 1991, and saw how WCW could give away tickets. Fans weren't invested. It was really, really dire. And that they basically had to make some changes. He became executive producer, tightened the ship, cut costs. And he did cut a lot of costs. He cut a lot of costs. He figured out better base salaries and doing stuff with Disney MGM Studio, all that. How Hogan came into play in WCW, they, of course, fudged around with it. Hogan saying, Vince and I agreed that we had 2 different ideas. Yeah, Vince's idea was you weren't drawing anymore, Hulk, and Hulk wanted to cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase contract before the Money in the Bank briefcase was ever thought of, beat Yokozuna, win the title, go to Japan, denounce the value of the championship he was holding, then drop it to Yokozuna, not drop it to Bret Hart at SummerSlam 93. And there you go. Hogan in a religious shirt because he traded one bullshit addiction for another. I'm going to stick by that. That's my opinion. Also, I believe Hogan is the fake type of religious guy. And the WCW New Japan co-promotion, we see footage from, I believe it was a Super Show 3. It was in 93. They were putting 60 to 80K in the Tokyo Dome, said Eric Bischoff. Google the capacity of the Tokyo Dome, folks. About 55,000. Even if that's like just, the stands and everything and not including the field for wrestling events, I guarantee you maybe can put 10 to 15. You might be able to get to 70. You might be able to get to 70. 80, what are you going to do? Pack them in like goddamn sardines? Yeah, it's a big field, but you still need to set up for the ring and the lights and the stage and all that and everything. And whatever. It's not North Korea, Bischoff. You don't have to mess with the numbers that much. Footage of Scott Hall from 2014 is unfortunate that Scott Hall did pass away. Nash as well, and that they took more money for lesser dates. That had been covered before. Hall's debut on May 27, 1996. You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. Hogan, talking about, I saw this, man, I was so captivated and everything. And Hogan, I believe, was filming that 3 Ninjas movie, if I recall correctly. I forget which one it was. I really do forget which one it was. But he had been off TV since his last appearance was April 15th, 1996, and he wasn't missed. He wasn't missed at all. I mean, some fans might have wondered where he was, but he was getting booed constantly for months and months and months, to the point that it led to Uncensored 96. I mean, that bullshit, like, nobody wanted to see Hogan in this concept, or in this current gimmick anymore. Nobody wanted to see him in this environment because the bloom was already well off the rose. It was already wilting, like the goddamn beast needed to get a kiss before, the last rose petal fell, now he's a beast forever. But Nash debuted 2 weeks later. His late son, unfortunately now, his son was born, his son who passed away, and I felt really bad for Nash here. Nash, very, very emotional. He offered some good tidbits, but he was pretty emotional by the end. We ain't here to play. I don't know who this Marco Raimondi is. He was fine. I think he was doing a book. Okay, is what he did. I mean, he was fine. He was better than that David Shoemaker guy. At least he seemed like he knew what the fuck he was talking about with this Marco guy. And then the the cops showing up, having their hands on the guns while, it was the Steiners, Luger, Sting, and Harlem Heat in a three-way, and one of Harlem Heat rolls up Lex Luger while the cops are in the ring and win the tag titles, which is always funny to me. Great American Bash 96 clips. They powerbomb Eric Bischoff. No mention of Hall and Nash, you know who we are, and leading to Vince McMahon suing them and everything. They probably didn't want to talk about that. Vince looking pretty goddamn stupid for suing them, and then the future Hall and Nash clones. Poor Glenn Jacobs and poor Rick Bogner. So, his fake Razor, fake Diesel. Hogan not wanting to be a heel until you walk a mile in my red and yellow shoes, you won't understand. But it was going to be Sting. Or rather, Sting! And Hulk had to relent, basically because he was being booed out of the building, and Hall and Nash were really, really cool. Yeah, they needed a third guy, but the thing is Hogan had to latch onto that to gain a new part of his career. He basically had to extend his career because he probably wouldn't have been gone. He probably wouldn't have been, too far gone from leaving the company by that point, because he was, I believe, negotiating another contract and had to do it where he was going to, get more money or get maybe the same amount of money, but he was going to have to do something to justify that because they were gaining momentum. Hall and Nash were cool. Hogan talking about, here's a guy, a generation older and everything. And yes, in the sense of how long his career had gone, sure, but he almost made it seem like he was the elder statesman. Hogan was 44, Nash was 37, Hall was 38. He'd been in wrestling a hell of a lot longer than Nash, and a number of years longer than Scott Hall. But that being said, Hogan, unfortunately, didn't come out of this looking very good. And then we get the whose side is he on? They play up the whole thing. Hogan wasn't gonna, possibly wasn't gonna turn, possibly was gonna turn. They weren't actually sure. Heenan uttering that line, Hogan dropping the leg, cutting the promo of his life, saying if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, you people wouldn't be here. Hogan telling us exactly how he felt a number of years before. All that audio got leaked, and we didn't want to listen. And Hogan getting, talking about all the trash getting thrown in the ring, that they needed Hogan, but Hogan needed them more. Because, all due respect to Sting, it would not have worked. It had to be Hogan. And it gave him rejuvenation. And there was no plan initially. They had to basically figure out a logo and merchandise and all that stuff and everything. And yeah, you didn't expect something to hit like that, so honestly, you're going to hit the ground running and not want to stop. And then we get footage montages with stupid rap music. By the way, the West Texas Rednecks were correct. And they were just killing people week after week after week after week. And threw Ray into a trailer. Threw him like he was a dart. And essentially, they really were cooking. I mean, the last time that Raw won a ratings victory before that 83-week winning streak was June 10th, 1996, which was the Raw just before WCW's Great American Bash. And then from the 17th of June, 1996 to April 13th, Well, April 6th, technically, because April 13th, 1998 is when WWE won. It got really one-sided for a while. I mean, I do remember looking back on it, but I remember thinking WCW was a lot cooler. Even though WWE is putting on some good shows, Vince still didn't want to relent with the cartoonish gimmicks until he was forced to. Waltman coming in, he would, and I'm glad that Sean Waltman got a chance to chime in. He didn't get a chance to chime in nearly as much, but then again, you got to think about it. He was only part of the group for about a year and a half, because he was back in WWE by the Raw after Mania 14. They ran the Steiners off the road, that black and white footage. And there were some good parts to this. Then you got the Hog Wild running a wrestling show in Sturgis. God, that was a shit fest. Hogan's a champ. Reigns for nearly a year. They skip over Lex Luger beating him. The Giant turning heel. For, of course, that Giant, the future Big Show, only time he would turn heel. Of course, it became a goddamn running gag. And Bischoff, on air, was, just against the NWO, and then he became the on-air authority figure. He became the guy that was the head of the NWO. Eric was like Palpatine. Yes, let the bad booking flow through you. And they skipped over Fall Brawl 96, which was stupid, because I thought that was a real important thing about the catalyst of Sting, or in regards to the catalyst being Sting. Turner executives took notice. They talked about Randy Anderson, referee Randy Anderson, who actually was going through cancer, and they did a storyline to fire him so he could obviously get treatment and get paid and stuff like that. But then apparently Citizens got pissed when, I believe, Citizens of Rome, Georgia, where Randy was from, his wife and kids actually were on the show a couple weeks later, and Bischoff said, "Tell your dad that he's fired." Okay, and that was good stuff. That was good. And Harvey Schiller got calls from people that were buying into this, and Turner executives were even saying, like, how can you have somebody in charge of this thing if you're going to fire somebody who's dealing with cancer? They bought into it because they didn't know what the hell wrestling was. Harvey Schiller should have been part of this. Harvey Schiller's still alive. I would like to have seen him be part of this. And then they talk about, the music, the being the good guys, or being the bad guys that were good guys. And then Sting finally shows up. It was nice that Sting was included. And Hall suggested the Crow. The Sting NWO storyline was so well built. I mean, you could argue Bash at the Beach 96, but you could say from, Fall Brawl 96 especially. Is that good enough for you right there? He tells him to stick it. He starts he's growing his hair out more. He's wearing the black and white and all that. Then eventually reveals his allegiances. Less is more. Sting's appearances meant more because he'd be in the rafters, where he'd come down, he'd attack people indiscriminately, and then focus on the NWO at Uncensored 97 and going forward, which would give us basically 9 full months of that. And the NWO reach, the death row influence, that's why they, Nash said they were wearing the bandanas backwards. Dennis Rodman added credibility. They did show a clip of Jay Leno. Thank God they didn't show Road Wild 98, one of the most embarrassing main events in WCW history. Monday Night War ratings. They mentioned how they beat them for a while. That Vince was this close to being out of business. WWE still had a solid foundation in pay-per-view. Now, I'm not saying WWE wasn't having financial issues, but they were still making money on pay-per-views. And by the mid to later 97 period, they were doing better. Yeah, Mania 13 didn't do all that well, but then they were doing a little bit better. And the ratings were ticking up. And WCW also was spending an exorbitant amount of money. And then, and I'm not going to get too far into this, but the whole thing was Sting. Like, the plan was for Sting to beat Hogan at Starcade 97, and that was planned till the day of the show. Hogan puts it on Bischoff that a plan wasn't coming together. Bischoff basically said Hogan used his creative control that he had never used before. He was still shielding Hogan. We all know that Hogan used creative control quite a bit, but why let the facts get in the way of you protecting your best friend? Yeah, Hogan said, I'm going to call an audible. Because Hogan didn't think that, and of course there's a story from the famous podcast that Bischoff did with Conrad Thompson, that he wasn't tan enough. Sting wasn't tan enough. The bottom line is they screwed up this whole goddamn thing, and it was 700,000 buys, or whatever the hell it was. 770,000 buys, I forget exactly. They did a lot of business. And they had a sold-out venue in the MCI Center, and they screwed it up. They screwed all up. They made Bret Hart look like a goddamn idiot. They made Sting look like an idiot for not kicking out. The whole fast count thing didn't end up happening. Hogan completely making sure that they shit the bed. That way, everybody was cooled off. Sting completely nullified by that point, because Sting didn't mean anything after that. Oh, he still got reactions, and they weren't the same, because people were like, he looked like an idiot. He didn't kick out of something that was an obvious not fast count. And it just ended up being the start of the downhill slide way before it should have started sliding down. Because yes, they were getting big ratings in 98, even when they were losing in WWE. Bash at the Beach 98 and other pay-per-views still did pretty goddamn well. Starcade 98 did pretty well. And then what happened in 99? I'll get to that. The whole point is they screwed up the thing with Sting so goddamn much. But check out my Starcade 97 review, retro review, and my Super Brawl 8 retro review if you want to hear my full thoughts on that stuff. Because this was just such revisionist history, it actually made me goddamn laugh. They talk about the NWO Black and White Wolfpack storyline, which didn't work at all. And the NWO was even phased out right after Halloween Havoc 98. They were gone. They were completely gone. Like, yes, you might still have the Wolfpack music and stuff like that, but as a concept, they faded out of existence. And that should have been it at Starcade 97, but moving on. Finger Poke of Doom was the death nail. Now, am I going to blame Hogan? Am I going to blame Nash? I'm going to blame Hogan more than anything, because Nash, if Nash had been booking at that point, sure, but Nash even said, I didn't start booking until February 99, and I don't think that they would have done, I don't think Nash would have booked something like that. Nash is a pretty smart guy. They just cooled off Goldberg right after Starcade 98. He did not get mentioned at all during this goddamn thing. And then Bischoff in the ring, and Hogan running for president. And as long as you were a good little white boy or girl, you'd be fine. AOL Time Warner merger, Vince buys WCW. They just skip over all that. The WWE run of the NWO doesn't last very long. Rock versus Hogan footage of everybody just going absolutely crazy. The Sky Dome switch, as some people called it. And then they get to Scott Hall's death, and I felt so bad for Kevin Nash. You could tell how gutted he was, and how gutted he still is. Losing his best friend, and then his son, I really feel for Kevin Nash. I'm so grateful for the podcast Click This that he does with himself and Sean Oliver. It's very good stuff. Very, very good series of stories. And then, that was pretty emotional. And then it's a good thing they ignored the NWO revival attempts in TNA, like with the band coming back together. And then Bischoff was at a Comic-Con and talked about a young woman named Amanda that told a story that was very, very emotional. And then she actually emailed and shared the whole story. Emailed him and his wife, said she wants to talk to you. That she told a story about her dad. Her dad was an alcoholic, but Mondays were wrestling days. Her mom's no longer there. Her dad's no longer there. She's getting married. Would Eric walk her down the aisle? And you know what? That was a good story. That was a good story. It's a good way to wrap it up. And then we get to the NWO legacy, which will be as a stable that was very tremendous and influential and everything, and the for life and all that. But it also was the poison pill that helped kill WCW, in addition to all the overspending and everything and stuff like that. So as far as biographies, this is definitely quite a bit of whitewashing. It wasn't the worst thing that I've seen, but it was definitely something where I'm like, wow, they totally got that shit wrong. Hogan taking no responsibility for anything, except the finger poke of doom. He's like, I'm so sorry, I wish I could take it back. No, Hogan, you knew what the fuck you were doing. Anyway, agree, disagree, what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Recklin. I'll see you soon.